Hello again, everybody. This is Ed with Call Me Mr. Broadstreet. You'll notice I have my sunglasses on. I won't have them on too long, but kind of base these off of the sunglasses that John Lennon wore in 1980, kind of the tortoiseshell, more square frames he was wearing at that point in his life. So this week, I'm here to review the 1988 documentary, Imagine John Lennon. Of course, the DVD is what I'm using for most of my review, but I wanted to show off my old VHS right here, and you will have seen those in the photos. So we'll go ahead and get these off here. There we go. Alright, so just like the Give My Regards to Broadstreet review, this is also going to be done in 3 parts. Part 1 this week is going to be the film. So unlike Broadstreet, this particular film right here, it is available on both DVD and streaming, whereas Broadstreet is only available on DVD and VHS, but not streaming anywhere online. Part 2, the next review, will be the accompanying soundtrack to this film, which, as opposed to Broadstreet, for a little compare and contrast, the Broadstreet soundtrack is on CD, and it's also available online to stream and to download. This particular soundtrack is available on CD, but not online or streaming to download. So kind of a little bit of a difference there with the 2 films. And finally, part 3 of the series of reviews for this particular documentary, it's going to be the companion book. So I'll be getting to that in the subsequent review. So just kind of a quick recap before we get deep into the film, and yes, there will be spoilers ahead. Film review, so basically the film was released into movie theaters on October 7th, 1988 in the United States. This was just about 2 days before what would have been John Lennon's 48th birthday. Also was around 8 years after his death. A little quick background, so basically the documentarian David Wolper, very famous for a lot of different documentaries. One he had done just recently to this was about Elvis. He was working on a documentary for the restoration of the Statue of Liberty in 1986 for its 100th anniversary. Yoko called him up around then, wanted to talk to him, and he said, well, I'm busy with the Statue of Liberty events around July 4th, but let's see if we can connect in about another week or few weeks or however long it was. So it was first in 1986 that he actually approached Yoko, or rather she approached him, about making a documentary about John's life. So just a little bit of background of where this is all coming into play. So the film itself, it was released onto DVD in 2005. There are some bonus features, and there's actually a lot more bonus features here than in the previous 2004 DVD release for Broadstreet. And I'll get to those bonus features really towards the end of the review, kind of going in depth with those. The film itself had a budget of about $6.5 million, and per the IMDb database, what I was able to find was it grossed about $3.7 million in the US and Canada. Ironically, the opening weekend gross was about $1.4 million, or the total gross for Broadstreet. So this was much more financially successful, but obviously being a documentary about John's life. Narrated by John himself, so you're really going to get some interviews with other folks, but for the most part, you're getting audio clips of John Lennon throughout his life, both audio and video clips. Now, I hope I never failed to mention this book, again, per Keith Badman's book, which I did a previous review for. October 6, 1988, there was a premiere in Manhattan for this documentary, and it took place with Yoko in attendance, so she was there for the Manhattan premiere of this film. So again, we're going to go ahead and dive deeply into the film, so just one more final warning. Spoilers ahead. You have been warned if you have not seen the documentary. So we'll go ahead and start into it very shortly, in depth. Alright, so I'm back, and here we go. What we start with in the film is that we start with a shot of Titanhurst Estate. Now, this was John's home in England during the 1971 period of making Imagine. It's going to be a thematic returning to throughout several clips in the film, several parts in the film. Kind of a centerpiece that anchors the documentary as it kind of goes back and forth from the beginning of John's life onward. We get the first release of Real Love in the opening credits, and this is about this is a song recorded by John in 1979. This was basically 8 years before we get the Beatles anthology version that gets worked on and kind of augmented by Paul, George, and Ringo during the 1994 and 1995 anthology sessions. It's kind of interesting when I rewatch this film, John comments that, well, why are you recording your life like a diary? And his response is that, well, essentially every Beatles song, etc., is a diary of who they were at the time. I think it's very fitting that, that this is all being recorded in that very same fashion. I think that the thing to remember is that with John, he's arguably one of the most well-documented individuals of the 20th century. There really is a lot of video footage, demos recorded, even during the 5-year 1975 to 1980 retirement phase, house husband phase, whatever you want to label it. And it's even more remarkable. I mean, this is all pre-online, pre-internet, as it were. So at this point in the film, at the beginning, we're just seeing John. He's working on the Imagine album. We're getting footage of John, Yoko, Phil Spector, and George Harrison kind of all working on the album. But then it kind of flashes back a little bit to, we're getting into the early years of John's life. John is seen in a period interview about 1971, or I think 1972, kind of describing his early life. We do get a nice interview with Aunt Mimi. I think Aunt Mimi was John's aunt who raised him, basically after the death of his mother. And even kind of before the death of his mother, he was kind of sent to live with her. Aunt Mimi, she passed, I think, around 1991 or so is when she passed away, if I'm recalling correctly. John kind of talks about, well, he was reestablishing a relationship with his mom since he had, been away, living with his aunt from, his childhood until about the age of 16 when she's killed by a drunk driver. So kind of a lot of tragedy in John's early life, which shaped who he was going forward. We do get more early years clips again, so the documentary is kind of moving along at a fast pace. We get an interview with Cynthia Lennon. Cynthia is John's first wife. It's even nicer to rewatch it now again since she passed away in 2015. She initially says, well, I didn't want to be with John at all. He just wasn't my type, but all that changed. He kind of had that rough teddy boy look to him, that rough, I could kill you look way back when in the late 50s and early 60s. John then goes on to describe meeting Paul, their first meeting, George kind of coming through Paul. So again, we're kind of hearing from John's audio perspective about the formation of the Beatles. It kind of goes along very quickly, so already we're getting to that they're going to Hamburg, Germany, where they did a lot of club dates and really honed their craft as a band. We also get a really nice little quick interview with Alan Williams as the first manager for this film. Alan sadly passed away in 2016. And we also just kind of get a nice other clip from George Martin talking about working in the studio together. Again, this is the very early years of the Beatles, going along very quickly. I know, sadly, we lost George Martin a couple of years ago as well. So it's just great to have these perspectives in the film and these interviews at the time, especially a lot of these folks are no longer around. We kind of get a quick clip of the, recording Love Me Do in 1962 and the Royal Variety Show that the Beatles would perform at. So again, there's just kind of a quick pace kind of getting through the early years. And with the film itself, it's about an hour and 45 minutes. So, you're packing a lot into a little under 2 hours, covering a 40-year lifespan of someone. We're then brought back to the 1971 and Imagine session, so we kind of return from that period. We get kind of a nice demo version of Imagine. It's kind of a first run-through on piano only. John's kind of goofing with it a little bit, which is nice to see, but, it's almost a little bit of nerves. He's just writing the song. He doesn't know what's going to become of the song or how treasured it will be by the public at large when it does get released. We get nice clips of John's first son, Julian, visiting at that time, visiting with John and Yoko at their Titanhurst Estate. We then kind of get a current clip of Julian being interviewed about his father. Julian looking very 80s in this clip. So again, these clips were probably, if the movie was released in 1988, we're probably getting interviews filmed about maybe 1986, 1987, somewhere around there. So yeah, everybody's going to kind of have more of an 80s look to the interview clips throughout the film. We get something very telling as well just right after Julian's interview, that Cynthia comes back on the screen and she gives further thoughts, and John admitting himself, yeah, he really hadn't been great as a father to Julian, during the early years. He was busy establishing his career. John himself was, 24, 25 at the time. And, of course, then we're getting into, a bit of the Beatlemania, so we get footage, the famous footage of the 1964 landing in New York City. You get the press conferences of the time, etc. This is kind of known to a lot of hardcore fans, and I'm sure a lot of folks out there are very familiar if you've had any, listened to or seen any Beatles footage out there whatsoever. You're getting an idea of the frenzy. Okay, they next clip to the D.C. concert, the first D.C. concert, I believe February 11th, 1964, just 2 days after the February 9th, 1964 Ed Sullivan appearance. So, they're kind of conquering America. Okay, so, we're getting to this early part right here. So that's pretty much it for that. But then we move on to the next clip in the film. And then we return to Titanhurst back in 1971. So again, coming back to the Imagine Error sessions. This part, we see a fan who's been staying on the grounds during the time that John's making the Imagine album, on his home grounds, right? So John's talking to this particular fan. Now, this is obviously kind of somewhat a sad premonition of later events in a way. Obviously, it's England, 1971. There isn't much security to think about. The fan's not really threatening John, but it is probably a little bit disturbing. So you're getting Yoko and John kind of standing off to one part of the house, the front entrance. You get one of their assistants kind of standing in the middle, and then kind of to the right, from our perspective to the right, you get that fan kind of just talking to John. The fan's really telling John, the lyrics are speaking directly to him, that, that somehow John seems to be communicating directly with this particular fan. John sets the record straight. Look, that anything can mean anything, but that John's only thinking of him and Yoko at this time, at best, singing about his own life and everything. And again, it is in a way a little bit disturbing to see, given what we know happens later, but of course also given the fact that now you could not get within 10 miles of a celebrity without, at least the first wave of 10 security guards stopping you on the way, not to mention cameras and everything else. But what John does, very compassionate, he invites the guy in for something to eat. Now my understanding is that later this particular fan met with his own tragic ending, that I think the year after John was killed, I think this particular fan died in a paragliding accident, from my understanding. Again, this fan, he just seems like kind of a little lost, a little unsure, thinking that, John's directly communicating with him. And again, hey, for my money, I'm a huge fan of all the Beatles and solo Beatles, but never once have I ever thought they're directly communicating to me. But again, that's the difference. It's metaphors. It's communicating about their lives or what they're going through. And during this particular clip, we get a nice little clip of the performance of Jealous Guy, which is a really good song on the Imagine album that I did the previous review for. So we get a little bit of return in the timeline to 1965 Beatles Shea Stadium concert footage. So again, we're still kind of working our way through the Beatles years. John makes a really good quote about the Beatles giving up everything they had at that time. They're in their mid-20s performing and working for a living. Other people are going to high school, to college, to having normal lives. There's a performance of Help Live at the Shea Stadium footage, which is shown here. Then they cut to them getting their MBE awards in 1965 from Buckingham Palace. Then we really quickly go to Manila, which was a disaster in and of itself during the 1966 tour. We get the famous John bigger than Jesus comment taken way out of context during the 1966 tour. That, of course, went brilliantly over just very well in the American South. Yes, I'm being sarcastic, I know, but especially at that time, right? So the Beatles end their touring in 1966. John goes on to film How I Won the War with Richard Lester. Richard Lester had previously directed them in both Help and Hard Day's Night. We then get a discussion of Sgt Pepper really quickly. George Martin gives a quick interview about really collaborating with them on Sgt Pepper. George Martin has a funny little part of the interview where he discusses that the Beatles would kind of keep the drug use hidden from him, in the studio, and he wasn't really too keen on it. Kind of like, the schoolboys hiding it from the schoolmaster, that type of thing, or from the adult in the room, the older adult, given that George Martin obviously was older than the Beatles themselves. We got a nice little clip about John. He debunks the whole LSD origin story of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Yes, it's really just about Julian's drawing Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. It has no reference to do with LSD itself. We then quickly get to Brian Epstein's death. Sadly, way too young. He left us way too young in 1967. Cynthia kind of gets another interview clip in the film about their marriage kind of falling apart at this time. And John talks about meeting Yoko for the first time, so we're kind of getting a little bit further along in the story itself. We get some very nice clips from 1968 from the Beatles performing their song Revolution, the fast single version, not the White Album version. We get into John is now marrying Yoko at this point. And about 47 minutes into the film, at this particular point, is we get a then current interview with Yoko. Now, it's amazing that as of the taping of this, that, she's still with us at the age of 88, soon to be 89 next month, God willing. It's funny to look at it, not funny as in a laughing sense, but just funny to look at it, how young she looks in this interview from 1988. She's probably, about 54, 55 in the interview at that particular time. There's just a nice little clip of them from about the 1969 period. They're saying fortunately and unfortunately to each other. Real quick to give a little bit of context, so they're both just talking to one another, saying something along the lines of, well, fortunately, we know what will happen. Unfortunately, you're right. A little bit of wordplay back and forth. It's kind of a nice, funny scene. If you get to catch it, definitely catch a clip of that. They're kind of just riffing on the future together, right? We're getting, a little clip of the Bed In for Peace from Montreal in 1969. And at this point in the film, we also see a little clip of John being interviewed for Man of the Decade by ATV over in England. They did a Man of the Decade special at the end of the 60s. I think the other two besides John were John F. Kennedy and I think Ho Chi Minh, if I remember correctly, as the three Men of the Decade that they decided to cover for that special. We're getting further into the film. We see a clip of John being interviewed before finally leaving England in 1971 about him and Yoko getting harassment from people over in England. Again, they leave in 1971, never to return to England, at least both together. Again, that's circa 1971. We kind of get a little bit more in depth about the bed-in 1969, so a little bit of flashing back and forth in the timeline. Again, just a little bit of Let It Be footage at this point, with John and Yoko being interviewed at that time. John just kind of cluing us in, at least in the film, Let It Be was the end. We get a nice little clip of Don't Let Me Down from the rooftop performance. Although, again, I think the Get Back documentary from Peter Jackson sheds a whole lot of other new light. But again, I'm keeping in mind that this documentary was released in 1988. They only had the Let It Be film to go off of and not all this other recent footage that's since been discovered. We get a great montage of footage set to the song God by John Lennon in 1970. I don't believe in Beatles, I only believe in me. All these things that he's renouncing, not believing in, from the Plastic Ono Band album in 1970. Next up, we get another return to the Imagine sessions from 1971. So we're getting some footage of John and George in the film. They're working on the song How Do You Sleep? How Do You Sleep, kind of a response to one of Paul's songs on the Ram album that John felt was attacking John personally. So John's response would just kind of be direct and, how do you sleep at night? But we also get kind of a nice clip real quick from the mid-70s, John discussing the song Steel and Glass, like a rewrite of How Do You Sleep, kind of attacking Alan Klein. John says in this little later clip from about 1975, hey, it only matters what Paul and I think. Paul and I are okay. So it just shows, hey, we didn't hate each other's guts. We got over it. Everybody argues, everybody fights. What can I say? That's just life. We next get some really nice footage from them kind of going to New York City. So we're getting now into John's life during the troubles with the immigration and deportation. Getting into the very beginning of that, we get the 1972 Madison Square concert footage during this part of the film. They're kind of also going into the Lost Weekend phase, which is really only briefly touched in this particular film. We get Elliot Mintz gets to say a few words. He was actually their PR man later on. Elliot kind of first met John and Yoko in the early 70s, and he gets to interview John during this time and during the Lost Weekend phase for John. Speaking of the Lost Weekend, we get some nice little interview footage from May Pang. She was John's companion during that Lost Weekend, which was really from about 1973 to 1975. May was an assistant for both John and Yoko. Yoko chose May to just keep John company. She says, look, you be with John and, keep him from, somewhat going off the deep end. He kind of did, but it might have helped at least stabilize him a little bit while he's separated from Yoko. And John's reflecting on this point, look, I acted like I was back in college again, I'm drinking, all this other stuff, going wild and crazy out in L.A. during this time. Elliot has a great little clip about one of the only negative things you could say about John was he just wasn't great with the drinks, that John could be very charming, but after about 2 drinks or so, kind of starts snarling during this point. So again, this is the mid-70s. Everything's going pretty much off the rails in a lot of ways. But then you get May's take on it, where she says, well, maybe the Lost Weekend wasn't so lost. John was actually very productive. They got to see a lot of people like Elton John, Paul and Linda McCartney, during this time, and, different people. So take from it what you will, during that phase. But then we get a little bit further on in the timeline. And now we're entering the 1975 to 1980 phase of John's life. So to start things off, we get a very nice clip of the Woman video from 1980. We see that Sean is born. Of course, we get some nice home video footage of John with Sean when Sean was very, very young in the Dakota. We do see Sean Lennon interviewed here. He's probably about 12 years old, I'm going to guess, from the interview footage. Again, it's kind of funny, as I commented earlier, it's just funny to see him in that kind of 80s jacket, that 80s style. He's got the round glasses, kind of an 80s, not quite a Michael Jackson jacket as such, but sort of a similar style that was popular at the time. He just recalls his dad being in the film Yellow Submarine and asking his dad about it. His dad saying, yeah, I was part of the Beatles, I'm not part of that anymore. We get some double fantasy photos, some really nice photo montage from the double fantasy sessions. Really nice photos that have popped up in a whole bunch of other places. They'll also be in the book, which I'll get to later in part 3. John just kind of makes a comment during one of his interviews, hey, something along the line, weren't the 70s a drag? Well, let's make the 80s good. We then get into a little clip with the film where Yoko, at that point in the 1987, 1988, then current interviews, is reflecting that, yeah, there was a lot of premonition of something happening when looking back on 1980 from that vantage point in time. She kind of wanted John to go back to Bermuda, where he had previously been, kind of resting and recuperating at that point, but he says he wants to stay no matter what. And she's describing this, you could see the pain in her eyes. It hadn't really been that long, and I can't imagine you're next to your husband, you're both going home, and you're losing him right there next to you, practically, for all intents and purposes. We finally then, of course, get to see, a little bit of the aftermath, the way that the actual death is handled in the film. There's kind of some montage of later 1980 photos used in the film. We don't see any photos from that particular night, although those have circulated. We do not get the name of the person that did it. I will never mention him on any reviews. I don't think that person deserves any type of notoriety whatsoever, nor any free publicity, certainly. That's kind of one of my rules. I don't bother to mention that person. You can look them up. The person who did it, though, robbed us of a very wonderful person, in my view, and is serving their due justice. But enough of my ranting on that soapbox. We get to see kind of the aftermath and commentary from Julian, again at that particular point being interviewed in the 1980s, saying, well, yeah, you know, he and his dad were getting closer. There was really no more walls between them. They could talk about a lot more. Cynthia saying, you know, Lennon's music is going to live on forever. She comments that there was, really a vulnerability to some of his music, which people kind of connect to. I'm paraphrasing here, obviously. Sean just missing his dad not being around. Obviously, I imagine that's still the case, no pun intended. Yoko, near the end just saying, hey, John was, husband, friend, an old soldier who fought with me together. The film kind of ends with the full Imagine performance at the white piano, so it's kind of bringing everything back to that Titanhurst 1971 footage, kind of bringing everything full circle thematically, even as it's going in a chronological order. In the credits, we just get a little bit of both the Beatles song In My Life playing, and Real Love from the beginning of the film that John recorded is playing over the end credits. I finally want to just touch on the special features, but before I do, again, I can't recommend this film enough. It's an essential film. It really shows why John is loved and missed. So we get to the special features on the DVD. Again, a lot more special features here than on the Broad Street DVD. You get a John Lennon trivia track. It just kind of plays bits of trivia below, kind of in subtitles throughout the film below as you're watching different clips. So kind of nice to have just a little bit of trivia. It gives a little bit more context. The next special feature is a tribute to John Lennon, the man, the music, the memories. About 14 minutes and 48 seconds feature. It's just interviews with Andrew Solt, who's the documentary producer. Another interview with Yoko. I want to say this is conducted probably about 2003 or 2004, prior to this being released in 2005, somewhere around that time period. David Wolper, he's the documentary director. You get other folks such as Sam Egan, who's a co-producer. You get Bud Friedkin, who's a supervising film editor. And you get Burt Lovett, who's also a film editor, just kind of giving their thoughts on John. Real quick, just what I got from this special feature. This turned David Wolper, the director, into a fan. I'm sure he was aware of the Beatles and who they were before, but he even admits he was more of a Sinatra guy at the time, being older. There's just some nice photos as well throughout this little interview with different folks who worked on the film, their memories. You get some nice photos of John and Yoko. Some photos that obviously didn't make it into the film itself. It's interesting that David insisted on control when working with Yoko. So David said, look, it's got to be an honest documentary and I've got to have complete control over it. Yoko agreed and said, yeah, I want it to be something that's honest, something that's straightforward. It's basically good that David wasn't really a fan as such, so he could maybe be a little bit more objective. Whereas if I was making the documentary myself, I'd probably have 2 hours of just footage from 1980 alone itself, which I would watch, by the way. And if Peter Jackson ever directed something like the Get Back documentary for John's solo years, I'd love to see something like that. Just my own personal view. They get some different recollections. What would you say to John if you could? Things like that in this little clip. We get another little special feature. It's just about 5 minutes and 39 seconds. John and Yoko, Truth Be Told. It's really just a BBC interview filmed at Titanhurst in 1971, kind of about different topics, about a little bit about music and things like that. Their thoughts on music and having to do with music and sex and that type of thing, in society. Nice little clip to have. It's a shame it's only that length. It looked like there was more questions that were asked, and I wish this could have been a little bit longer special feature. Next feature, you get an acoustic performance of Imagine. This performance is from the Apollo Theater, December 17th of 1971 in New York City. 3 minutes and 36 seconds. Nice enough performance, nice enough to have, certainly. Final special feature, you get the Island House. The Island House, this is a little tour of the lake house at Titanhurst where John and Yoko were during the Imagine era. This is about almost 8.5 minutes, 8 minutes and 23 seconds clip. They're buying a pool house for the little small island on the grounds. There's a little tiny island you have to take like a little canoe over to get to. It's really only like a 20-second canoe ride. I mean, you can swim from one end to the other, it looks like. This almost looks like an HGTV segment, so it kind of had me laughing a little bit. Foreshadowing reality TV and buying something, funny enough. And they're constructing a little pool house. There's a little song clip of actually a song called Mrs. Lennon by Yoko. It's kind of a straight-ahead ballad, actually, from her 1971 album Fly, which, again, she was recording her solo stuff all around the same time that, John was issuing some of his solo stuff as well. So, some good special features. Again, overall, really one well-done DVD, really well-done documentary. So to wrap things up, very enjoyable, high rewatchability factor. I'm sure at some point in the future, relatively soon, I'll even rewatch it. There's probably little things I may catch upon a subsequent rewatching, since it's been a while since I had watched this before doing this review. So that's about it. The next review is going to be, again, part 2. That's going to be the accompanying soundtrack to this. So I just want to say again, thank you all for listening. I hope you got something out of this. Please go watch the film. Highly recommended in my view. Very essential. So until then, I hope everybody is safe. And please remember just to give a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. And I'll see everybody in the next review. Thank you so much. Bye.